Imperative. In this module, we want to look at the second person volitional, the imperative. This is the most intuitive, so second person, because these are what we call commands. Now, in the introduction to this chapter, I said that volitionals are related to modals or are similar to modals, and it's the imperfect that can be translated as a modal. So it should come as no surprise that the form of the imperative and the other two volitionals as well is related very closely to the imperfect, because imperfects can be translated as modals and volitionals are very similar to modals. So how do we make these things? What do they look like? Well, let's get our chart up here. This is the imperfect, yifkod, of pakad. So we've seen this before, just pulled this from our chapter 17 module. Now what you do here, I'll actually give you a preview of all of them. Let's put our lines in here. So this is third person, second person, and first person. What we'll see is that in the third person, the jussives are exactly the same. There is no change in form. You have to rely on context to tell that it's meant to be a jussive rather than an imperfect. So there's a very strong correlation there in terms of form, obviously, because it's the very same thing. In the cohortative, it's sometimes the very same thing, but often they'll add a at the end. Of course, we'll go through this in detail, but I'll just throw it on here. So you see the big picture. Cohortatives usually add an at the end, and the stress goes to the a. Now, what happens, maybe I should have used red or something. What happens with the imperatives is that you take off the prefix. So imperative is the second person, so we're dealing with the second person forms, and you take off the first part. And then you get your imperative. So there's one change we have to make, which is a change we would expect, but let's take a look at that. So here I've grayed out the imperfect. This is the same list I just had. And I've put in here the, I've put in here the imperatives, taken off the t, all of them. Now one thing I forgot to do is put a dagesh lene in here, right? Let's put a dagesh lene in here. Of course, that's because we have a begad kafat letter. Pei is a begad kafat letter, so this is tif code. This becomes pekod, f, p. And that's because this comes at the end of a syllable, and this comes at the beginning. And when a begad kafat letter comes at the beginning of a syllable or a word, then you have to use the hard sound, which is marked by this dagesh lene. So I should have put those in. But that's not really part of the form. If you had a word here that didn't have a begad kafat letter, then you wouldn't be concerned with that. But we can see here, we just took off the first prefixes. The rest of this here comes straight from the imperfect form. With one change we have to make. If you look at these here, I'll put these in here. Put my dagesh lenes here. If you look at these red ones, there's a change we have to make with these two. Can you tell what it is? Is there anything about this that isn't allowed in Hebrew? Well, it's these two here, right? You can't have two shavas at the beginning of a word. You have to apply the rule of shava, which if you remember from, I don't know what, chapter 6 or something, or before, two vocal shavas become, or two shavas become a hidik. The first one becomes a hidik and the second one stays. So, we make that change here and here. We'll put a hidik under each pei. So there's our hidik. Again, I'll put our dagashim in here. Make sure this is correct. So we have a change in these two in that the first one goes to a hidik. But in these two, it's just taken off that first prefix from the imperfect form, and you get the imperative. Now it's good to know that this comes from the imperative, but what I would do though is I would memorize them as separate items just because they're so common. So I'd put them in a list like this, and this is how you'll see them in tables. Again, I should have done this. Put our dagesh lenes in there. So, pekod, pikdi, pikdu, pikodna. And these middle two in the middle here are the ones that have the hitic. So pikod is masculine singular, pikdi is feminine singular, pikdu is masculine plural, and pikodna is feminine plural. So this is something to memorize. Let me put my big M here. And it's of course good to know that these come from the imperfect forms, so you know if you have to write it out that all the rest of this here is the same except for these two changes here. But I would memorize them separately, just so you have them right at your fingertips. If you rely on the fact that these come from the imperatives, you'll always be thinking, okay, what's the imperative form and how do I take off the tav and all this. So it's too slow that way. Now, if you remember on our chapter on the imperfect, we had two other types of imperfects. We had statives and we had gutturals. And actually it was, I guess, the chapter on imperfect and the chapter on statives. And both of those forms, the statives and the gutturals had the patach theme vowel. The regular dynamic verbs have the holum. That's why we see the holum here and here. Here they're reduced. But the statives and the gutturals had a patach. Remember that? So the corresponding imperatives also have a patach. Completely regular. So here we have shachav, which means to lie down, which is a stative. And here's shema, which means to hear, and that is a guttural, third guttural. You see the I in there. And so you can see here, let me get my little pen out here. So here and here we have our patachs, right? Holum here for the stative, or for the dynamic. The stative here has the patach, and the guttural has the patach. And all these forms here, because they have these vocalic suffixes, you have pretonic reduction, the theme vowel disappears, so there is no theme vowel there anyway, so we don't have to worry about those. And these two here, again, we see the patach show up, so in the feminine plural. So I wouldn't memorize these. I would just memorize this dynamic form here. And just remember that statives and gutturals have a patach, both for the imperfect and for the imperative, because the imperative comes straight from the imperfect. Okay. Now, there's another form. Always exceptions, right? There's another form of the imperative called the long imperative or the lengthened imperative, and or the long form. And this is a bit different, but it does show up, so we need to look at it. So if we look at the code, so this is our regular masculine singular imperative of the dynamic verb. And maybe I'll write down our stative as well. Shechav. We won't bother with the guttural one because we know the guttural is following this anyway. What the dynamic form does is it adds an ah at the end. So let's pull these over here. You add an ah. Maybe I'll do this with, say, green. So just like I said, I gave a hint or I gave a preview. I said that the cohortative adds an ah. Well, the long form of the imperative adds ah. So we'll put those on here. Now, this is a vocalic ending, so just like when we add vocalic endings to the imperfect, we get this pretonic reduction because you can't start a syllable in Hebrew with a vowel, and so it has to steal this consonant, and then the syllabification changes. So we lose this guy, we lose our theme vowel, and it reduces, just like, just like it does in the perfect and the imperfect when you add these vocalic endings. So we get this, and let me do that here too. So we get rid of our patach, we got rid of our holum, we got rid of our patach, reduces, And then we get a vowel change here. And the vowel change for the dynamic verbs is a kametz hatuf. So let's see, get my tools right here. So it's a kametz hatuf. This is not a kametz because the stress is at the end, and this is a closed syllable. Remember CVC, unstressed, because stress is here, means that this symbol is kametz hatuf, the short O, not the long A. So it's pokda. Okay? Syllable would go right between here. Now down here, for the statives and for the gutturals, the vowel is a hiddic. So we went from pekod to pokda. Looks quite different, really. It's quite a lot of changes. Because we add this, we get all these other changes. Shechav becomes shechva. What I would do, I wouldn't, well, depends how much memorizing you want to do, I suppose, but don't worry too much about what this vowel is. Just know that the long form of the imperative has the a ending, and that it sounds a bit different. I think that'll be sufficient for now. Okay, but don't forget that there is a long form of the imperative. And for the most part, people say that this has no difference in meaning. There is a paper that was written, I can't remember who it was by, who looked at these long forms and came to the conclusion that perhaps it does have a little slightly different meaning, the long forms versus the normal forms, and that it's either emphasis or a bit of politeness. I don't know. I can't remember what the paper is, and I haven't been able to find it, so if someone out there knows what that paper is, I wouldn't mind knowing again. But most grammars that I've read, in fact all the grammars I've read, say there is no difference. So aside from that one paper, people are saying there's no difference in meaning between the long form and the normal form. Okay, let's look at an example. We almost don't need examples for this because it's so common, or so intuitive. Shema Yisrael, this is the great Shema of Deuteronomy 6 that we've already seen at least once. Hear, O Israel, and then over here you'd have the rest of the statement. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. So Shema, this is your regular form of the imperative, normal short form. And we see our patach here because we have a guttural, right? Shema. So there's an example. And let's see. Okay, I have another example here. A couple things I want to say about this example. One is that when imperatives don't always have the same force. Sometimes they're simply a command. Other times they need to be translated with something a little less forceful, perhaps as advice or counsel, or an invitation or request, especially in prayer to God, because we're not commanding God what to do. We use the imperative form, and this example, this comes from Waltke O'Connor, page 572, and it is found in Psalm 82, verse 8. So here we have the psalmist speaking to God, and he says, Kuma Elohim Shafta Haaretz. Now kum is a verb we haven't seen yet, but you can see that this is an imperative, or at least you can see that this is the long form of the imperative. We have that a at the end. Kuma means arise. Kum means to arise. So arise, O Lord, or O God. Shafat is to judge. Again, we have long form. See the a there, the reduction here, and the kametz hatuf. Shofta. I hope I said that right before. Shofta. Arise, O God, judge the earth. Shofta haaretz. We're not really commanding God to do this. And the psalmist isn't really commanding God as if he has the authority to command God what to do. It's more of a request. So sometimes, especially in prayers, or if someone is speaking to a superior, you need to back off on the forcefulness of the command and translate in English in something that perhaps expresses that a bit better. Sometimes you can use a command. Like here we have, Arise, O Lord, judge the earth. We are using a regular command form in English as well, but we understand that we're We're not using a command quite like we would if we were talking to someone beneath us, someone that we had authority over. So those are imperatives, second person volatives, volitionals, and they come from the which one should go from here? Let's look at this one. They come from the imperfects. You strip off the first part, the prefix. We're going to have to change this because we have two shavas together, this one and this one, so this will become a hidik, and those are our forms. Pikod, pikti, piktu, pikodna. And then we also have the long form where we add an a at the end, just like we do with the cohortative.